Let's do it. Rigging. I have avoided it for years, but now it's time. This video is going to be one of several videos where we're going to cover different techniques for rigging for objects that are not biped or do not look like humans with two legs. I'm briefly going to cover how I built this funky little hand model and then show you how I rigged it in Cinema 4D and then went through the binding process with this single mesh. Then I'm going to show you how we animate this with individual pieces and get all of this out into Unreal Engine. We are specifically going to focus on objects that are not bipeds or full humans. So for this one, it's a hand, which is part of a human, but we're going to do other things like robotic arms, wires, cables, all these strange things that will allow you to use the power of rigging inside of Unreal Engine. And we're going to do it in multiple ways depending on what we need to do. Good luck. Starting off in Cinema 4D, I'm going to walk you through the different stages of how I did this. I'm not going to go step by step through this because that would make for a pretty long video, but I am going to just do some high-level overviews. So to start, this hand I got off of Sketchfab, and I can put the link in the description if you want to download it and follow along. There was a hole in the back. I kind of pieced this together and just made this one solid object, and then kind of finished the UVs and whatnot, but that we won't cover exactly to how to prep. We start with this basic hand, and I wanted to get something that's a bit different, but this was a great starting model. And you can see there's nothing rigged on here, there's nothing bound. I just wanted to start by showing you the process of this. And to create the version, what I did, started by using a Voronoi fracture. So let's drop this inside of this guy, let it process for a minute. And this, as you can get a pretty good idea, already started to get close to what I wanted. So I started with these offset fragments. Okay, way too high of a value, so let's start pretty small. So let's try 0.02, and that's about what I had. I think something similar. So if you wanted to recreate what I had done to get to this next version of the model, I went through, did this, I baked out a version of it so that I had my assignments here. Yeah, and I try subdividing some of this early on, but as you'll see with the density of this mesh, like the mesh starting off is fairly dense in general, but by the time you get this fracture in here and then it calculates, you can start to see like you don't get all that same geometry on the inside. It's going to be horribly triangulated, so if you do go to subdivide this and you want to smooth it out, it won't work. So with this version that we created, I then went through and used remesher on this, and these are all going to be a bunch of islands, which is what I wanted. And I played with these settings a bit, which I won't go through in detail, but as you can start to see now, like I have all this geometry that's even on the inside of these surfaces as well as wrapping around the outside. So if I did go through and say I wanted to like subdivide this now, it's a lot smoother. Your UVs are still intact, but you can kind of play with some of that. This is what I ended up getting afterwards. So I broke up the Voronoi, I played around with the settings, I pushed it out and then ran it through remesher, and I was pretty happy with this. There's obviously some additional density in some places, and you'll also notice too that I didn't really use this for the final, but it was nice to know the UVs were intact. So, you know, if you get back far enough, still seems to work, but if you get up close, you know, kind of good from far from good. We had this hand, but this isn't exactly what I wanted because I didn't want it to be all fleshy. I wanted it to have these materials on here. Now, you would probably want to condense this more than I did, because if you see my list, I wanted 63 materials because that's how many objects there were. This is probably more painful than it needed to be, but I wasn't 100% sure what I wanted to do with it in Unreal as far as material assignments go, and having a unique material assigned to each island with a selection tag pulls in all of these material slots in Unreal. Now this is a bit painful to recreate, so if you had 6 or 7 of these, it'd be way easier, but I wasn't quite sure, so I said, why not? We're gonna do that. And as you can see on this model, if I expand it open, all these material tags were on here. So the way that I would go back about doing that quickly is select a little chunk, I'd hit UW, select all, and then I would go pick the material that I want, right click and apply. And I think that's the same color. You didn't see a change, but now that material is applied to that section. I did that over and over and over. Took a couple minutes, but it was on the tedious side. Okay, so that covers how I made this model. I went through and UV unwrapped it, just did an auto wrap, did pretty good. So the mesh is what I want, great. And I'm gonna do a very quick and dirty pass because it's not gonna be a huge rigging tutorial, but I will walk you through the steps of what I did so you can see the process, and then I will show you the finished result. First thing I did, you can use the joint tool. Let's pop open this character tab. We're gonna click this little top thing to dock it because we're gonna keep coming back to it. A lot of times you could start with your multiple viewports, and you could use the joint tool, and if you hold down Control, you can come in here and start making your chains this way and adjusting it. It's a little faster. The downside with this is you have to go through, and I mean, you can see like these joints didn't align to where they wanted them to be. So I could come in and, you know, offset each one, and then you kind of go down the line and do it. I just didn't prefer that way. So really all I did was I just make a joint, drop it in this root, and now it just kind of manually positions. So I started with the wrist, yeah, something about like that, great. And then I would just hold Control, get this little down arrow, and make a child. And for me, this just worked a little faster. I could kind of just go joint by joint. If I'm doing this pinky, it's a little rough to find this pinky knuckle. The other great thing is if we don't want to stare at this thing and we're not binding it yet, you can leave this original model, this hand regular here. So we've got like knuckle. Yeah, that looks about right. And then same kind of deal here. You're gonna want to come back and rename these afterwards. I mean, you can do it later, but it's better to just keep it clean. And just kind of align these to where you want them. So finger by finger. Oops. Went through and just did my alignment. I kind of quickly check in the viewport to what kind of makes sense. And kind of line that there. And then the last one down at this tip of this finger. Line that into place, looks good there. And that would create your rig there. And then the other thing I had, so we call this just the wrist, which I know is gonna be my root. We'll call it pinky, knuckle 1 or whatever, knucklehead. I also wanted to have this thing have like a tail, which sounds very strange, and it is strange, but I create another joint and drop it as a child of the wrist. My initial thought was that I would put this guy in here and I would have this hierarchy where it's separate, so it's not completely an FK chain going all the way down the line, but my goal was to have this be a tail, and I could kind of wiggle this thing and, I don't know, wagging tail, but whatever. Weird stuff. Look at this. So as you can see, I've got this piece. Now I'm not going to go through and do the entire hand, but I will show you the binding process and then where we got to the next step. So what we're going to get to is if we turned off this hand regular, we want this guy. So let's hide these original bones. So this is the section, and this is pre-bound, so I'm gonna kind of bounce around a bit, but just so you can kind of see, these are the bones that I went and put into this thing. So wiggly tail, and then I've got my knuckle system all the way down, and this, I set it up so that we could do FK or IK, but this is where I wanted to be. So I'm gonna kind of back up a minute. Let's pull this back out, and let's do our hand fractured material. So this is the model that has nothing bound to it. So say, hey, this rig is great, we're ready to move forward. I want a hand with only one pinky. That's exactly what I want. So to do this, first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna go up to my root bone here, and I'm gonna middle mouse click down on this to select all of its children. And then I'm gonna hold Control and select the mesh that we want. Now we come over here to our character menu, and we're going to hit bind. All right, did its thing. This is now bound. So we're gonna look at this. I've got our weight tag here. This shows which tags are bound. And then I'm gonna look at the weight tool. So I'm gonna go in and investigate what I've got here. So I'm going to dock this guy over here. We're gonna go up to the rig, and we're gonna start looking at the weight binding. Now, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on this. One, because I'm not amazing at it, and two, it's very tedious and time consuming, but I'm going to go down the line and start selecting these bones. Now, if you have more joints in here, like I said, your ring, middle, and index finger, these would color code a bit better. And then sometimes you're just gonna get some leaking that goes over the side, but we can check and see how these are all bound. And yeah. So that gets your binding. So like I said, it's not in-depth overview. I get all of the joints on here, and the only thing I really did is I'll use this smooth function. So if you see like some hard lines in the rig, let's actually look at the finished product. So we're gonna select this guy. Now you can start to see on this rig where I've got all these pieces, okay, some of this stuff starts to overlap, and you can pretty much go through bone by bone and start to look. Now, some of these had, like, some of this yellow was coming up over on the other side. The two I used the most were smooth and subtract. There's a lot of stuff that really goes into this that I am not very good at, but using absolute, you can paint the weights on and get it to work really well. Subtract was nice because the weights were already there, and I could just kind of remove stuff that I know I really didn't want it to be on this bone, but I'm not overriding or affecting everything else, which gets some weird results. So subtract and smooth. So at this point you have a bind, or your rig is bound. Great, we have this thing moving. And I've already gone ahead and put this IK tag on it. I'm gonna slide this up so I can show you what the FK looks like. And here's this pinky that we've been focusing on. So now as I go through, and you don't wanna go nuts because that's a bit on the gooey side for what I want this to do, but if I go down through here and I start bending each bone, you can see that it's doing what I want it to do. So okay, everything looks like that's correct. And the last thing before we get into creating an IK tag, and then we're gonna get into animation, is you're gonna wanna select all these bones. And I've gone ahead and done this already, but it's gonna show you its point in space wherever it's at. Now, if you start moving these around and you wanna get it back to this pose, you could set a bind pose, but the easiest thing to do is just select all these bones and then freeze your transformation. So at least for this pinky, I've gone through and frozen most of them. But now if I want to just go back and zero everything out, they're all zeroed. And if I want to move it later, you know, like I said, it's weird offset, but zero these out, and then you're kind of prepped to start getting into going further. Now, the last step we're going to get into before we start animating is I put an IK chain on here. So to do this, select the top bone that you want in this chain, and you're probably not going to want to go from your wrist all the way down. I just want the chain to go from pinky knuckle down to the tip. Select this, tag, rigging IK, and then that's going to bring up this tag. So these will be empty to start. You're going to have your main first joint that this is on, your last joint that you want to be the end of this. You drag this guy down and drop it into end, and there is no goal on here, so I just went add goal. That dropped in this null all the way at the bottom. I brought it up, added a shape to it, and gave it some color just to make it slightly easier. But now you should have oh boy, and I wasn't paying attention. I switched this over to FK. Bring it back to IK, and let's see. Go to this pinky goal. Problem solved. So now we've got this IK chain that we can move around, and there's no pull vectors on here. I didn't go too in depth, but I really just wanted to go through and give this basic functionality so I could get it to animate. Which then leads us to our last section. So when we export this out, we want to have animation sequences inside of Unreal. And I want to have a bunch of these because I'm going to use this like motion clips in Cinema 4D. I want to have these that I can just attach into Sequencer and blend between and stack and do all the fun stuff. So to do that, I have to go through and use the take system. And this is pretty handy, because now what I would just do for this, and you can set pose morph tags in here, which I ended up doing, but it's not required. You can just go in and start animating. I'll come back to this pose morph tag. Oh yeah, I did set up. No, we'll just do it now. Pose morph time. So this tag, I've got this idle animation here. It's not really anything. I've just kind of set this default state. I went in and I set the parameters to just have a, no movement, but this is kind of just the default state that I can drag and extend, and I have something I can kind of blend between. But then I went through and just animated and set these poses. So as you can see, all my poses are in here. I select fist, and then I go and move the IK points to exactly what I want them to be. We've got other stuff in here too, I think. Yeah. So I went through and just set all of these, and now as I'm just kind of scrubbing and turning each of these morph states on, I can animate in between these. So the idea is I can kind of go back and forth between these two and make several animations that we can export out. So point, bird, if you need it, flat, if I just want to straighten it out. Like a lot of these are just helpful, and then you can mix them. So we can either animate these if we want, or we can just animate on their own. But we're going to go through and make a new child take, and this one we're just going to call finger animation. And I'm going to do this just once, and that will be it. So to do this in takes, this lock needs to be on. Took me a while to figure that out, but that needs to be locked in, and this is going to allow us to, I guess, unlock animation properties. So let's say I want to use this pores morph. I'm going to drag and drop up here, and now you can see these are activated. So let's kick open our timeline so we can animate. And let's just do flutter. So I'm going to start with 100%. Yeah, we'll do 100 here, and we'll end it, whatever, 100. We're gonna make a loop out of this. So 32, we're gonna set this to 0, and then I wanna just kind of blend these for, you know, that's what I wanna do. All right, so these guys kind of go back and forth and say that's my animation. That's what I want to have just looping over and over, and I can kind of mix this in, and that's done. So if I go back out, you can go through and do this for as many of these as you want. I think I created a take for each one, so I had it to export. At the same point, if you wanted to continue doing this, we'd make a new one, and I'll show you how to do this outside of takes. So finger rig animation. And now what I would do is take all of these goals that control everything, drag these into takes, and drop them in. And now it's telling me these are what we can access to animate. So if we start with, come back in here, each one, we're gonna do the position. We're gonna animate there, and let's say we just wanna clench this into a fist. Bring it up, and we're just gonna animate all these to the spot that we want them. Something like that. That's a pretty weak fist. And set the end goal for all of these, and hopefully they don't all go back. All right, so now I have keyframes for all of these, and you can see we're just moving those nulls around, which are the goals, to get from state 1 to state 2. And that is actually animating in here. So if I go back from take to take, you can kind of see the animation stored. And we've got that in there. Great. And our main take has nothing animated because we're not animating in there. We're trying to contain each take that's going to export out into an animation sequence. And bonus, if you're wondering what the finger flapper is, that's this guy. Super creepy. But I had a finger and I wanted to do something with it, so this is what it is. And same thing here. I have a finger flapper on here. I have the IK chain as well, but this null, I used a, let's see, a line to spline tag, and I just have it going around in the circle. So if I activate this one, you can see that it's just going around in the circle, and it's like a little creepy, fleshy bat. I don't know why I thought of that, but I did. And the other version of this as well was I tried two of them just to see what would compare. This one I just used cappuccino. I clicked this guy down here, set it to start, and then just kind of did a quick circle with my hand and trimmed it up. So this one's a bit more organic, and the other one's a little more robotic, and I kind of tested those. All right, enough of finger flapper and the hand. So this is the model that we want to leave. We have all this other stuff, but we don't want all of this other stuff. Now, if you bound any other meshes like I did, I originally have this entire root with my whole rig and this hand, but I also wanted to export out the skinny one and the regular one. So these ones, I pretty much went through the same process, but I selected all of the bones that I wanted and I just bound these as well. So these have the same binding as the other ones, but you don't have to do it. So really it's hand 4. I'm going to middle click on this. This gives me everything that I want. File, export, FBX, the little gear. And you want to make sure that you have selection only selected. Otherwise you're going to get all this other junk that you don't want. This is just what's selected. And what I was saying with the other ones is you could select these other ones as well that have the same binding. And they'll all be bound to the same skeleton. So you could do all 3 in a file if you wanted to, and they'd all share animations and stuff. Everything else looks good. We're going to go through and export it, which I've already done. And we're going to go into Unreal. Almost done. So we're in Unreal. You can see that this is the version that I've brought in. I will walk you through all of these details, but when you select your file and drag and drop it in, so I have my hand rig, pretty sure that's the one. You don't have to do the import to level. You can just drag and drop it in. It will give you your import, and you want to make sure that skeletal mesh is checked. This will do all the work. It'll make sure that your actual skeleton is brought in. I usually keep import normals on here because the normals were set up in Cinema 4D and I want those to come in too. And then animations, you may have a bunch of these at different times, and by default I think these come in at exported time. Now, 2 things to keep in mind with this. If you're doing something where you want everything to be from like 0 to 30, and even though you may only go from 0 to 15, if you do exported time, it's going to be this whole range. Now, this can be helpful if you don't want to plan on doing revisions to your animations, or you want extra time. It'll give you exactly what you want. But for this one, I had some animations that were 15 frames and some that were 2 seconds. So I went with animated time, and this will trim down each of these animations to be at that exact time. And the rest of this stuff, good enough. So I would hit import, and I don't feel like doing it again. But then it's going to bring you in the skeletal mesh. It's going to bring in all of these animations that we had done. Each one of these was one of our individual takes. A physics asset, which I don't really need, and then the skeleton. And we're going to go into more of this in depth later, but just to kind of cover what this stuff is if you have questions and how Unreal does it differently than Cinema. Here's all those ridiculous material assignments that I had. I only ended up using a few materials for this, but like I said, I have options later if I want it to be all wacky and sorts of stuff. So this is the hand imported. And I assigned all the stuff. It also has the skeleton connected to it. Now this is nice because if you want to get into some control rig stuff, which we will do in a different video, your skeleton's in here. You can kind of go in and modify and tweak some of the stuff separate than your mesh. It's not completely all bound together, which is kind of nice. So that is all of that. You can see all these extra materials that imported as well, which we just got rid of, but this kept the assignments in place, so not the most efficient work ever. And at that point, it's pretty straightforward, so let's drag this guy in, zero it out, move him over here, and let's make it a lot bigger. Go king size. So this is nice and big, and now you're saying, okay, how do we animate our stuff? And now we're just into the basic of a sequencer. So grab this guy, we can drag this in, and now it's just a matter of clicking this little animation. You'll see all of the animations that we have that are bound to this rig will pop up here. And this is also helpful because if you also brought in those other 2 hand models that I was talking about, you wanted all 3, you wouldn't have to bring in individual animations for each mesh. All of these would work on all 3, so it's kind of helpful. So let's do hold. And now you can see that that hold that I had animated, or better yet, let's do the flutter, because you saw me animate that one. And now this animation is in here. We've got all of these on and we can play with these. So, kind of creepy. And if you extend this out and just drag it out, it's already set to loop. So this guy will just repeat the loop that you had. And I'm looking at this, I'm like, it's a little weird. It's kind of choppy. I don't know if I love it, but that's all right. We have other things that we can work with. So I'm going to do another animation. We're going to do hold. Yeah, hold. And I'm going to show you how I can use this as well. So now, if we twirl these down, and just to show you, I'm going to set the weight of this to 0. And now this whole animation timeline is not actually being active, but this hold is. So if I drag this guy out, you can see it's going to repeat the loop because I didn't create a seamless loop in Cinema, but that's okay too. I'm going to, let's see, hold down Alt and drag until this snaps to the end. So I've got 2 of these now. I'm going to right click, go to Properties, and for this, if I want to make a loop, I'm just going to reverse this. And now I've got this opening and closing, and I can, you know, for the time being, just manually drag a bunch of these, so this is kind of looping with it. Great, it's, you know, squeezing or honking a horn or whatever. And if I flip this guy back on, now you can see that these guys are kind of overriding with each other, and I can go down and set the weights of this. So say I want this to be a little bit more like that. You know, I don't know what you'd ever use that weird motion for, but it's there. And you can stack all these up. Along with these as well, to override these animations, you can also bump your play rate up to make this like really quick, so you can see how it sped it up. But now, like I said, you have full control over and stacking these, and it works a lot like motion clips in Cinema 4D. And really, if we need to go back and update it, we go into our takes, we activate the one we want, we change our animation, and when we re-export this out and come back in, all we really have to do is select the pieces that we want, right-click, and re-import, which is that one. And that will update all these animations to Cinema 4D. It's not going to break everything because all these are individual pieces, so it's more procedural and it's pretty handy. And that's the bulk of how you're going to get Cinema 4D into animations inside of Unreal. So, you know, bye-bye. Thanks for watching. Hope you found this helpful. If you did, subscribe. Really helps us out. And if you have any questions, please drop them below. We'll do our best to answer your questions that we can. And if you have any ideas or things that you would like to see, please leave comments and we will do our best to see if we can do that. Thank you.